The morning air over the small Norman town of Villers-Bocage felt strangely quiet on June 13th, 1944. Just 1 week had passed since Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy. The countryside still carried the smell of smoke, dust, and churned soil. Roads were crowded with military vehicles, tanks, and tired men trying to push deeper into occupied France. Yet in the narrow streets of Villers-Bocage, something unusual was about to happen. German Tiger tanks, massive machines feared by every Allied tanker, were already nearby, hidden among the hedgerows. And within the next hour, this quiet town would become one of the most intense and dramatic tank battles of the entire Normandy campaign.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
You can almost imagine the scene that morning. The sky was pale and calm, thin clouds drifting above green Norman hills. Civilians watched cautiously from windows or doorways. British armored vehicles rolled slowly along the road that cut through the town. The soldiers believed they had achieved a small breakthrough, but the German army had not disappeared. In fact, one of their most dangerous tank commanders was already watching them. His name was Hauptsturmführer Michael Wittmann. Wittmann was a veteran tank ace of the Waffen-SS, serving with the 2nd Company of Schwer SS Panzerabteilung 101. By June 1944, he had already destroyed well over 100 enemy tanks on the Eastern Front. Among German tank crews, his reputation was almost legendary. Among Allied soldiers, his Tiger tanks had become a symbol of fear. And now, in Normandy, he had found another opportunity. To understand why the battle at Villers-Bocage became so dramatic, you need to step back for a moment and look at the larger situation in Normandy. The Allied landings on June 6, 1944 had succeeded, but the fighting that followed was far from easy. The Germans had expected an invasion somewhere along the French coast, but they were not sure exactly where it would happen. Once the landings began, German commanders rushed armored divisions toward the beachhead to contain the Allies before they could break out into open country. One of the most important objectives for the British Army was the city of Caen. Located about 15 kilometers inland from the coast, Caen controlled key road networks across Normandy. Allied planners had hoped to capture it on D-Day, but strong German resistance had prevented that. Now the British Second Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Miles Dempsey, was looking for ways to outmaneuver the German defenses. The plan that led to Villers-Bocage was part of Operation Perch. The idea was simple in theory, but risky in execution. British forces would attempt to swing around the German flank west of Caen, pushing through gaps in the front line and reaching the open ground beyond. If successful, the British could threaten the rear of German positions and possibly force a retreat. The unit chosen for this maneuver was the famous 7th Armoured Division, the Desert Rats. These soldiers had gained their reputation fighting Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps in North Africa. Their emblem, the red jerboa rat, was well known across the British Army. Many of the officers and tank crews in the division were veterans who had spent years fighting German armor. But Normandy was very different from the deserts of Africa. Instead of open sand and wide visibility, the countryside here was divided by thick hedgerows known as bocage. Each field was surrounded by tall earth banks covered in bushes and trees. From a distance, the area looked peaceful and green, but for tanks, it was a nightmare. Visibility was limited. Movement was slow. Enemy forces could hide only meters away without being seen. This landscape would play a major role in what happened at Villers-Bocage. Early on the morning of June 13th, British armored columns from the 22nd Armored Brigade entered Villers-Bocage almost without resistance. The leading elements included Cromwell tanks, half-tracks, Bren carriers, and supply vehicles. Some troops pushed beyond the town onto the ridge known as Point 213. From that high ground, they could watch the surrounding countryside. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Looney Hind commanded the 4th County of London Yeomanry, one of the main tank units involved. His Cromwell tanks moved cautiously but confidently along the narrow road that climbed toward the ridge. Infantry from the Rifle Brigade followed in half-tracks, securing the route behind them. At first, everything seemed to be going well. Some German vehicles were spotted retreating in the distance. A few prisoners were taken. Many British crews believed they had surprised the enemy and found a gap in the German lines. But that assumption would soon prove dangerously wrong. Not far from Villers-Bocage, hidden behind trees and hedgerows, Michael Wittmann and several Tiger tanks were resting after a long night movement. They had arrived only hours earlier, and the heavy tanks were low on fuel, and some were not yet ready for combat. Yet Wittmann suddenly received reports that British armored vehicles had entered the town and were moving toward the ridge. He realized something important. The British column had stretched out along the road. Many vehicles were parked or moving slowly. Their formation was long and exposed. If someone attacked quickly, the entire column could be trapped. Wittmann did not wait for orders. At around 9 o'clock in the morning, he climbed into his Tiger tank, turret number 205. Only a few other Tigers were ready, but Wittmann chose to move immediately. His crew, driver Carl Mobius, gunner Balthazar Wohl, loader Walter Lau, and radio operator Herbert Pullman, prepared the vehicle quickly. The massive Maybach engine roared to life. What happened next would become one of the most famous moments of armored warfare. Wittmann drove his Tiger directly toward the British column. The road leading from Villers-Bocage toward Point 213 was narrow, lined with hedges and trees. British vehicles were spread out along the road. Some crews were outside their tanks. Others were eating breakfast or checking equipment. The calm morning suddenly shattered when the first British vehicle exploded. Wittmann's Tiger opened fire. At very close range, the 88mm gun was devastating. The first target was a British Sherman Firefly belonging to a squadron of the 4th County of London Yeomanry. The Firefly was one of the few Allied tanks capable of destroying a Tiger thanks to its powerful 17-pounder gun. But the British crew never had time to react. Wittmann's shell struck first. The Firefly burned almost instantly. Then Wittmann continued moving forward along the road, firing rapidly at every target he saw. Cromwell tanks exploded, half-tracks flipped over, Bren carriers burst into flames. The British column was caught completely off guard. Within minutes, chaos filled the narrow road. British crews scrambled to reach their tanks. Some tried to reverse. Others attempted to turn their guns toward the Tiger. But Wittmann kept moving, using speed and surprise. He fired again and again, destroying vehicles one after another. Eyewitnesses later described the moment as terrifying. The Tiger seemed unstoppable. Thick armor deflected return fire. The powerful gun knocked out targets almost instantly. In only about 15 minutes, Wittmann destroyed a remarkable number of vehicles. Historians still debate the exact number, but most accounts agree that he knocked out around 13 to 15 tanks and many other vehicles during this attack alone. It was one of the most dramatic single-tank assaults of the war. But the battle was far from finished. As Wittmann entered the town of Villers-Bocage itself, British forces began to react more effectively. Several Cromwell tanks tried to block the road. Infantry soldiers armed with PIAT anti-tank weapons took positions among buildings. One British officer, Lieutenant Bill Cotton of the Rifle Brigade, attempted to organize resistance inside the town. Meanwhile, other British tanks moved to engage the Tiger. The narrow streets now turned into a deadly trap. Wittmann continued firing inside the town, destroying more vehicles. However, his Tiger was now surrounded by buildings and enemy troops. British anti-tank weapons began hitting the tank from different angles. One British anti-tank gun, positioned near the town square, managed to fire at Wittmann's Tiger. Other Cromwell tanks attempted to flank him. The streets echoed with the sound of ricocheting shells and collapsing masonry. At some point during the fighting, Wittmann's Tiger suffered damage. Accounts vary, but many sources suggest that a British anti-tank gun or a tank hit the Tiger's tracks or suspension. The massive vehicle could no longer move properly. Realizing the situation had become dangerous, Wittmann and his crew abandoned the tank. They escaped on foot, moving through gardens and side streets before eventually reaching German lines later that day. The battle for Villers-Bocage continued through the day. German reinforcements began arriving. More Tiger tanks and Panzer IVs moved toward the town. British forces attempted to hold their positions, but the situation became increasingly difficult. The narrow streets, the hedgerows, and the surrounding hills created a confusing battlefield. Tanks struggled to maneuver. Infantry fought house to house. Smoke and dust filled the air. But something else was happening that would change the course of the battle. British tank crews had begun to deploy one of their most important weapons against the German Tigers, the Sherman Firefly. The Firefly was not a completely new tank. It was actually a modified version of the American-built Sherman tank. British engineers had installed the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun into the turret. This gun could penetrate the thick armor of a Tiger at longer distances than most other Allied weapons. However, the Firefly had weaknesses too. The long gun barrel made the tank easy to identify. German tank crews quickly learned to target Fireflies first. Many Firefly crews used camouflage or tried to hide their barrels with paint or branches to avoid detection. During the fighting around Villers-Bocage, several Fireflies began taking positions where they could ambush German tanks. The countryside around the town was perfect for this kind of fighting. The famous Norman hedgerows created natural hiding places. Tanks could remain concealed until the last moment. British commanders began organizing defensive positions along the ridge near Point 213 and around the town itself. They knew more German tanks were coming. By the afternoon of June 13th, German forces launched stronger counterattacks. Panzer Lehr units and elements of the 2nd Panzer Division moved toward Villers-Bocage. Several Tiger tanks joined the attack. But this time, the British were ready. Sherman Fireflies waited in ambush. When German tanks advanced along open roads or across fields, the Fireflies opened fire from concealed positions. The 17-pounder shells could penetrate even the front armor of many German tanks if the range was right. Several German vehicles were knocked out during these engagements. The battle turned into a deadly game of patience and positioning. Whoever fired first often had the advantage. Inside Villers-Bocage itself, fighting became even more intense. Buildings collapsed under tank fire. Narrow streets forced tanks into dangerous positions. Infantry soldiers from both sides used grenades, machine guns, and anti-tank weapons. Civilians hid in basements while the town above them shook with explosions. You can almost picture those cramped stone cellars filled with families waiting in silence. Every blast above their heads meant another building damaged, another tank destroyed, another soldier killed. Outside, armored vehicles burned in the streets where only hours earlier farmers had pushed carts and children had walked to school. By evening, the situation had become extremely complicated for the British forces. German reinforcements continued arriving. The British column that had pushed deep into the area was now isolated. Supply lines were threatened. British commanders realized they might be surrounded. During the night of June 13th to June 14th, the decision was made to withdraw from Villers-Bocage. British forces pulled back from the town and from Point 213, moving west to more secure defensive positions. To prevent German forces from using the town immediately, British artillery and air support struck Villers-Bocage during the withdrawal. Fires spread through parts of the town. Several buildings were destroyed in the process. The battle had ended without a clear strategic victory for either side, but its impact was enormous. For the Germans, Michael Wittmann's attack became a famous symbol of Tiger tank power. German propaganda quickly celebrated the event, portraying Wittmann as a hero who had single-handedly destroyed an entire British armored column. For the British, the battle was a painful lesson. The advance toward Caen had been slowed. The Normandy campaign would become longer and more difficult than many Allied planners expected. Yet the battle also revealed something important about the changing nature of tank warfare. The German Tiger tank was powerful, but it was not invincible. British Fireflies, when used carefully, could destroy them. In the weeks that followed, tank battles across Normandy would continue proving this fact. In places like Operation Goodwood, Operation Totalize, and the Falaise Pocket, Allied tank crews learned how to fight German armor more effectively. Ambush tactics, coordinated infantry support, and powerful anti-tank guns gradually reduced the advantage of German heavy tanks. Michael Wittmann himself would not survive the Normandy campaign. Less than 2 months later, on August 8, 1944, and during Operation Totalize near Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil, south of Caen, Wittmann's Tiger tank, now turret number 007, advanced with several other Tigers toward Allied positions. Hidden among hedgerows and farm fields were British and Canadian Sherman Fireflies waiting in ambush. At around noon, several 17-pounder shells struck Wittmann's Tiger. One round penetrated the tank's armor and detonated the ammunition inside. The explosion tore the turret off the hull. The entire crew was killed instantly. For decades, the exact unit responsible for destroying the Tiger remained debated. British Fireflies of the Northamptonshire Yeomanry and Canadian Sherbrooke Fusiliers have both been credited by historians. What is certain is that the same weapon feared by German tank crews, the Firefly's powerful gun, had finally caught up with one of Germany's most famous tank aces. Their remains were discovered years later and reburied in the German military cemetery at La Combe in Normandy. Today, Villers-Bocage is a quiet French town once again. Visitors can walk through its streets and see memorials marking the battle. The surrounding fields look peaceful, covered with grass and trees. But if you stand there long enough and imagine the sounds of that morning in 1944, you can almost hear the distant roar of tank engines and the thunder of guns echoing across the hills. Because on that June morning, the war rolled straight through Villers-Bocage. German Tigers entered the town with terrifying force, and hidden among the hedgerows, British Fireflies began proving that even the most feared tank in the world could be hunted down.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.